Los Angeles International Airport's Terminal 4 was experiencing one of its typical Friday afternoon rushes. Hundreds of travelers moved through the space like schools of fish, some darting quickly toward their gates, others drifting aimlessly, studying departure boards or searching for restrooms. The air smelled of coffee, disinfectant, and the particular brand of stress that comes with modern air travel. Near Gate 37, where a flight to Denver was preparing to board, sat Arnold Schmidt. At 73, Arnold had the dignified bearing of someone who had seen much of life but maintained his gentle spirit. His silver hair was neatly combed, and despite being confined to a wheelchair after a recent hip replacement, he sat straight-backed in his seat. A weathered leather carry-on rested in his lap, containing medications, a well-worn paperback, and a small photo album he always traveled with. His boarding pass for priority seating was tucked carefully in the breast pocket of his neatly pressed blue button-down shirt. Arnold had arrived early, positioning his wheelchair near the gate, but slightly off to the side, careful not to block the walkway. He quietly observed his fellow travelers. A young mother trying to entertain restless twins, a businessman rapidly typing on his laptop, a couple clearly embarking on their honeymoon. He smiled softly at these small human dramas unfolding. Around him, what Arnold didn't notice was the irritated young man pacing behind him, speaking loudly into his phone. Kevin Smith was 32, dressed in expensive designer clothes that seemed calculated to draw attention. Distressed jeans that cost more than most people's entire outfits, a leather jacket with prominent logos, and sunglasses worn indoors. His voice carried as he complained about flight delays and incompetent airline staff to whoever was unfortunate enough to be on the other end of the call. "I don't care what they're saying about weather. It's clear in Denver. This is just typical airline nonsense." Kevin barked into his phone, continuing to pace in the increasingly crowded gate area. "They just can't get anything right. Now, I'm going to miss my dinner reservation at Barolo Grill, and you know how impossible those are to get." On the opposite side of the seating area, almost unnoticed amid the bustle, sat Sylvester Stallone. The legendary actor was dressed simply in jeans, a black t-shirt, and a baseball cap pulled low. Despite his efforts to blend in, there was something unmistakable about his presence, a quiet strength that seemed to occupy more space than his physical form. He was traveling without entourage or fanfare, a worn leather duffel bag at his feet. His face, weathered by years and countless roles, remained largely hidden behind dark sunglasses. But his attention had been drawn to the elderly man in the wheelchair and the increasingly loud young man pacing nearby. As the gate agent announced pre-boarding for passengers needing assistance, Arnold began to maneuver his wheelchair toward the forming line. He moved carefully, mindful of other passengers, using his hands to propel himself forward rather than asking for assistance. His progress was slow but deliberate. Kevin, still engrossed in his phone conversation, continued pacing directly in Arnold's path, oblivious to the older man's approach. When Arnold politely cleared his throat, Kevin glanced down, annoyance flashing across his face. "Excuse me, young man," Arnold said softly. "I'm trying to reach the boarding line." Kevin's response was immediate and dismissive. He held up one finger in Arnold's face while continuing his phone conversation, signaling the older man to wait. The gesture was so disrespectful that several nearby passengers glanced over, eyebrows raised. Arnold waited patiently for a moment, then attempted to navigate around Kevin, who suddenly shifted position, inadvertently blocking the path again. Arnold's wheelchair bumped lightly against Kevin's designer shoes. "Watch it," Kevin snapped, pulling the phone away from his ear. "These are $1,000 Ferragamos. Can't you see I'm in the middle of something important here?" "I apologize," Arnold replied calmly. "I'm just trying to reach the boarding line. They've called for those needing assistance." Kevin looked down at Arnold with thinly veiled contempt. "Well, that's not really my problem, is it? Maybe you should Have positioned yourself better. He turned his back slightly, continuing his conversation. No, not you. Just some old guy who can't drive his wheelchair properly. The disrespect was palpable. Several nearby passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one intervened. The gate area had grown crowded, and the confrontation was creating a small bottleneck as people tried to navigate around them. Arnold maintained his dignity, hands folded calmly in his lap. Young man, we all need to share this space. A little courtesy goes a long way. Kevin's face flushed with irritation. He ended his call abruptly and turned to face Arnold fully. Look, Grandpa, I've got places to be and people waiting for me. Important people. You're holding up traffic here with your little wheelchair parade. Why don't you get an attendant if you can't manage by yourself? The cruelty of the comment hung in the air. A nearby woman audibly gasped. Arnold's expression remained unchanged, though something flickered briefly in his eyes. Not anger, but a profound sadness at the young man's behavior. I manage just fine, thank you, Arnold replied evenly. I just need to pass by. Kevin rolled, his eyes dramatically. Fine, whatever. But instead of stepping aside, he placed his hand on the back of Arnold's wheelchair and roughly pushed it to the side, causing the older man to grip his armrests to maintain balance. There you go. Problem solved. The aggressive action crossed a line. The wheelchair rolled several feet away, nearly colliding with a trash can. Arnold's small carry-on slipped from his lap onto the floor, its contents spilling out, medications, reading glasses, and the small photo album, which fell open to reveal what appeared to be old military photos. Across the gate area, Stallone had been watching the interaction with increasing concern. When Kevin put his hands on Arnold's wheelchair, something changed in the actor's demeanor. His posture straightened, jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Without a word, he stood, dropping his magazine onto his seat. He removed his sunglasses, tucked them into his shirt pocket, and picked up his duffel bag. Then, with deliberate calm, he set the bag back down on the floor. The gesture was subtle but profound, a man preparing to address a situation that couldn't be ignored. He began walking toward the confrontation, his gait purposeful. A few passengers noticed him and did double takes, whispers quickly spreading through the gate area. Kevin remained oblivious, now scrolling through his phone with an irritated expression, completely unconcerned with the older man, struggling to gather his scattered belongings. Arnold had managed to retrieve his medication and glasses, but couldn't reach the photo album without getting out of his wheelchair. Something clearly difficult for him with his recent surgery. Some people have no respect for personal space. Kevin muttered loudly enough for those nearby to hear, as if he were the wronged party. Probably shouldn't be traveling alone if he can't handle basic navigation. A small circle of space had formed around the scene, passengers uncomfortable, but unsure how to intervene. The gate agent was occupied with checking boarding passes and hadn't noticed the situation unfolding. Stallone approached quietly, passing through the ring of onlookers. Without saying a word, he knelt down and carefully picked up the fallen photo album. He took a moment to look at the open page, a black and white photograph of young soldiers, one clearly a younger version of Arnold, before gently closing it. Standing, he walked to Arnold's wheelchair and respectfully handed him the album. I believe this is yours, sir. Arnold looked up, momentary surprise crossing his features as he recognized the famous actor. Thank you, he said simply, accepting the album and placing it securely back in his lap. Stallone nodded, then turned to face Kevin, who was still focused on his phone. The younger man hadn't yet realized who had joined the situation. The contrast between them was striking. Kevin with his flashy clothes and entitled attitude, Stallone with his simple attire and commanding presence. Excuse me, Stallone said, his voice carrying that distinctive, slightly gravelly tone recognized worldwide. Kevin glanced up, irritation still etched on his face, which quickly transformed into shock as he recognized who was addressing him. His mouth opened slightly, phone forgotten in his hand. "I couldn't help but notice what just happened," Stallone continued, his voice calm, but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Did you just push this gentleman's wheelchair?" The gate area had grown remarkably quiet. Other conversations ceased as passengers realized what was unfolding. Kevin's face flushed, this time not with anger but with embarrassment. It wasn't... We were just..." he stammered. "Because from where I was sitting," Stallone continued, "it looked like you put your hands on a veteran's wheelchair and shoved him aside." He gestured toward the photo album in Arnold's lap. "Vietnam, wasn't it?" he asked, looking at Arnold. Arnold nodded quietly. "1st Infantry Division, 1969 through 71. Stallone turned back to Kevin, whose flush had deepened. "So you pushed aside someone who served his country, someone's father, someone's grandfather, because he was in your way for a moment?" The question hung in the air. Kevin seemed to shrink under Stallone's steady gaze. "I didn't know he was a veteran," Kevin finally managed, his voice significantly quieter. "Would it have mattered?" Stallone asked. "Does someone need to have served in combat to deserve basic respect?" Kevin had no answer. Nearby passengers were watching intently now, many with phones discreetly raised, capturing the moment. "I've played a lot of tough guys in my time," Stallone continued, "but the real tough guys, they're men like him." He gestured toward Arnold. "Men who served quietly, who faced real battles, not movie ones. Men who now deserve our respect and patience." The gate agent, finally noticing the situation, approached cautiously. "Is everything all right here?" "Actually," Stallone said, "this gentleman needs to board." He moved behind Arnold's wheelchair. "May I assist you, sir?" Arnold nodded, a small smile crossing his features. "I'd be honored." As Stallone began pushing Arnold's wheelchair toward the boarding area, Kevin stood frozen, the target of disapproving glances from surrounding passengers. The contrast could not have been more pronounced, the world-famous actor humbly assisting an elderly veteran, while the young man in expensive clothes stood alone, suddenly aware of how small his behavior had made him appear. "And young man," Stallone added, pausing to look back at Kevin, "those shoes you're so worried about? I've got a pair myself. They scuff, they get dirty, they're just shoes. But how you treat people, especially those who've sacrificed for others, that leaves marks that don't polish out so easily." With that, he continued toward the gate, Arnold sitting tall in his wheelchair, dignity restored. The gate agent checked Arnold's boarding pass, offering an apologetic smile, then glared briefly at Kevin before allowing Stallone and Arnold to proceed down the jetway. The other passengers in the priority boarding group parted respectfully, many nodding to Arnold as he passed. Kevin remained rooted to the spot, the recipient of disapproving glances and whispered comments. His phone, which had seemed so important moments before, hung forgotten in his hand. Sometimes, the most powerful lessons come from unexpected teachers in unexpected places. And sometimes, real heroes recognize each other, even across generations. As Sylvester Stallone guided Arnold Schmidt's wheelchair down the jetway, a palpable shift had occurred in Gate 37. The once noisy terminal section had transformed into a space of hushed conversations and sidelong glances directed at Kevin Smith, who remained frozen in place, the weight of public disapproval bearing down on him. The expensive shoes he'd been so concerned about protecting now seemed meaningless as he stood alone, watching the legendary actor and the elderly veteran disappear toward the aircraft. Flight attendant Chelsea Johnson greeted them at the aircraft door with a warm smile. Her experienced eyes quickly assessed the situation, the famous passenger she immediately recognized, pushing an elderly man in a wheelchair, both men carrying an air of quiet dignity. "Welcome aboard, gentlemen," she said professionally, checking Arnold's boarding pass. "Mr. Schmidt, we have you in 3A, a window seat in first class." "Thank you, young lady," Arnold replied politely. "Would you like assistance to your seat, sir?" Chelsea asked. Before Arnold could respond, Stallone spoke up. "If it's all right with Mr. Schmidt, I'd be happy to help him to his seat." Arnold nodded appreciatively. "That would be fine." Chelsea watched with interest as the famous actor carefully maneuvered the wheelchair through the narrow first-class cabin. There was something deeply compelling about seeing a man known worldwide for portraying strength on screen, demonstrating a different kind of strength entirely, the strength of compassion and respect. As they reached row 3, Stallone positioned the wheelchair and engaged the brake. "May I help you transfer to the seat?" he asked quietly. "I'd appreciate that," Arnold replied. "The hip replacement is still giving me trouble." With practiced care, that suggested this wasn't his first time assisting someone with mobility issues. Stallone supported Arnold as he moved from the wheelchair to the comfortable first-class seat. The older man winced slightly, but settled in with a grateful sigh. "Thank you," Arnold said, his voice carrying the weight of gratitude beyond the simple assistance. "Not just for this, but for what you did back there. Most people would have looked away." Stallone shook his head slightly. "Looking away is what allows that kind of behavior to continue." He carefully placed Arnold's small carry-on in the overhead compartment, making sure the medications and photo album remained accessible. "In the seat pocket." "Vietnam, 1st Infantry," Stallone commented, nodding toward the album. "My character Rambo was Vietnam, Special Forces. Different war experiences, I imagine." "Very different," Arnold agreed with a small smile. "Hollywood tends to add a bit more excitement than most of us experienced, though we had our share of difficult moments. I've worked with many veterans over the years," Stallone said, settling into the seat beside Arnold, 3B, his assigned spot by coincidence. "The stories they've shared, well, they've shaped how I try to portray those experiences with respect, even if dramatized." Their conversation paused as other first-class passengers began boarding, several doing double takes as they recognized Stallone. He acknowledged them with polite nods, but maintained his focus on Arnold, who was carefully arranging his boarding pass and identification in his wallet. Back in the terminal, Kevin remained near the gate, uncomfortably aware of the stares and whispers around him. The initial shock of being confronted by Sylvester Stallone was wearing off, replaced by a growing sense of shame. He glanced down at his expensive shoes, the ones he'd been so worried about, and for the first time noticed how garish the prominent designer logos appeared, not symbols of status, but of insecurity. With boarding continuing, Kevin reluctantly joined the line, his earlier pushiness replaced by uncharacteristic hesitation. He kept his head down, phone now tucked away, avoiding eye contact with other passengers who had witnessed his behavior. When he finally reached the aircraft door, Chelsea greeted him with considerably less warmth than she had shown to Arnold. "And Stallone." She checked his boarding pass with professional efficiency. "Seat 4C, sir. Down the aisle on your right." Kevin nodded silently and entered the cabin. His stomach tightened as he realized his seat was directly behind where Stallone and Arnold were engaged in conversation. He would have to pass them to reach his row. As he approached, the conversation between the two men paused. Stallone looked up, his expression neither hostile nor welcoming, simply observant. Arnold's eyes met Kevin's briefly, showing no anger or resentment, just a calm dignity that somehow made Kevin feel even smaller. Kevin lowered his gaze and quickly moved past them to his seat. He stored his designer bag in the overhead compartment and sat down, immediately turning toward the window, though there was nothing yet to see. In the row ahead, Arnold and Stallone resumed their conversation, speaking quietly about their respective experiences. Arnold's real military service and Stallone's decades, portraying various versions of heroism on screen. "The public thinks they know what combat is like from movies," Arnold was saying. "But the reality is less about dramatic moments and more about long stretches of boredom, punctuated by brief periods of terror and confusion. Stallone nodded thoughtfully. "That's what my friend Michael Hall, served in Desert Storm, always said. He consulted on a few of my films, always pushing for more authenticity in the quiet moments, not just the action sequences." Their conversation continued as the remaining passengers boarded. In seat 4C, Kevin couldn't help overhearing snippets of their discussion. Stories of Arnold's time in Vietnam, Stallone's efforts to authentically represent veterans in his films, shared connections to various military charities. The contrast between their substantive exchange and his own earlier behavior, his complaint about missing a restaurant reservation while sitting near a man who had faced actual life and death situations, grew increasingly stark. The final boarding announcement echoed through the gate area. Diana Buck, rushing to make the flight, hurried down the jetway with her carry-on bag dragging behind her. At 65, she moved remarkably quickly for someone her age, her practical shoes allowing her to almost jog to the aircraft door. "Just made it," she panted to Chelsea, who checked her boarding pass with a smile. "Perfect timing, Miss Buck. We're about to close the door. You're in 4B, middle seat." Diana made her way down the aisle, pausing briefly when she recognized Stallone in 3B. Her eyes widened, but she continued to her row, setting her bag in the overhead compartment before taking her seat beside Kevin. "Hello," she greeted him cheerfully. "Looks like we'll be neighbors for the flight to Denver." Kevin managed a polite nod, but remained turned toward the window. Diana, undeterred by his lack of enthusiasm, settled into her seat and immediately leaned forward to address the men in row 3. "Excuse me, but aren't you Sylvester Stallone?" she asked with unabashed directness. Stallone turned slightly and smiled. "Yes, ma'am. My late husband Frank was such a fan of your films," Diana continued, "especially the Rocky series. He always said they were about more than boxing. They were about the human spirit." "Your husband had good taste," Stallone replied warmly, "and he understood exactly what I was trying to capture." As they exchanged pleasantries, Kevin sank lower in his seat, the voices around him a painful reminder of his behavior. The aircraft door closed with a heavy thunk, and the safety briefing began. Kevin went through the motions of paying attention, though his mind was elsewhere. When the plane began its taxi toward the runway, Arnold retrieved his photo album from the seat pocket and opened it to a specific page. From his position in the row behind, Kevin could just glimpse a black and white photograph of young soldiers standing beside a helicopter, dust swirling around them in the Vietnamese landscape. "This was my unit," Arnold explained to Stallone. "3rd Platoon. We lost Thompson and Boyer a week after this photo was taken. Stepped on a mine during a routine patrol." Stallone studied the image with genuine interest. "Were you close?" "As close as you get in those circumstances," Arnold replied. "Nathan Thompson was only 19, had a girlfriend back home who wrote him every day. Nathan Boyer was 22, planning to become a teacher after his service." The simple, obituary-like descriptions hung in the air, young lives cut short, futures erased. Kevin found himself straining to hear more, suddenly and inexplicably invested in the stories of men who had died before he was born. The plane accelerated down the runway, pressing them all back into their seats as it climbed into the Colorado sky. The conversation in row 3 paused during takeoff, resuming once they reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign dinged off. Diana, who had been listening with interest, leaned forward again. "My husband was in Vietnam too, Army Corps of Engineers. Were you anywhere near Cam Ranh Bay in 70? "Passed through there several times," Arnold nodded. "The engineers did amazing work in impossible conditions. That's what Frank always said." "About the infantry," Diana replied, "that you all faced the worst of it while they built things." Their conversation expanded to include Diana, the three of them sharing connections and memories while Kevin sat silently behind them, a reluctant audience to this unexpected reunion of strangers bound by experiences he couldn't begin to comprehend. When the beverage service began, Michelle Walker appeared with the drink cart. "What can I get for you, gentlemen, and ma'am?" she added, noticing Diana leaning into the conversation. "Just water for me, please," Arnold requested. "The same," Stallone said. "I'll take a ginger ale," Diana added. Michelle efficiently distributed their drinks, then turned to Kevin. "And for you, sir?" Just water, thanks," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. As Michelle continued down the aisle, Stallone turned slightly, in his seat to better include Diana in their conversation. This adjustment gave him a clear view of Kevin, who quickly looked away, focusing intently on the safety card in the seat pocket as if it contained the secrets of the universe. "Young man," Stallone said, his voice neither confrontational nor particularly warm, "would you care to join our conversation instead of pretending to read the evacuation procedures for the 14th time?" Kevin looked up, startled. He hadn't expected to be addressed directly. I'm fine, thank you," he managed. "Are you?" Stallone asked simply. The question hung in the air between them, layered with meaning beyond its surface simplicity. Kevin found himself unable to formulate a response. Arnold turned slightly in his seat, his eyes meeting Kevin's. There was no accusation in his gaze, only a calm assessment. "We all make mistakes, son. What matters is what we learn from them." The gentle wisdom in the older man's voice, the man Kevin had so callously dismissed and literally pushed aside less than an hour ago, broke something loose inside him. The carefully constructed facade of importance he'd been hiding behind began to crumble. "I behaved terribly," Kevin admitted, his voice barely audible above the aircraft's ambient noise. "I'm sorry." Arnold's eyes, weathered by decades of life, experiences, held Kevin's gaze steadily. "Apology accepted," he said simply, with a dignity that made the words feel like a gift rather than an entitlement. Kevin swallowed hard, the unexpected grace catching him off guard. He had been prepared for righteous anger, for a lecture, for continued shame, not for this straightforward acceptance. "I don't understand," Kevin said, leaning forward slightly in his seat. "How can you just forgive like that? After how I treated you?" A small smile crossed Arnold's face. "Young man, when you've seen the things I've seen, you learn that life is too short to carry unnecessary burdens. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to Diana Buck nodded in agreement. "My Frank used to say something similar, said he left his anger in Vietnam because it was too heavy to carry home." Stallone had been watching this exchange with interest, his expression thoughtful. "In my experience," he added, "the truly strong people I've met in life aren't the ones who hold grudges. They're the ones who know when to let things go." Kevin sat back in his seat, processing their words. The contrast between his earlier behavior and the grace now being extended to him was stark and humbling. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he felt the uncomfortable sensation of seeing himself clearly and not liking what he saw. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, causing the cabin to shudder slightly. The seatbelt sign dinged on, and Michelle Walker's voice came over, the intercom asking passengers to return to their seats. The brief interruption gave Kevin a moment to collect his thoughts. When the aircraft steadied again, Kevin leaned forward once more. "Mr. Schmidt," he began, addressing Arnold by name for the first time, "may I ask, what's in your photo album? I couldn't help noticing it earlier." Arnold considered the question, then carefully passed the album back between the seats. "See for yourself. Page 12 has my unit, the men I served with in the 1st Infantry Division." Kevin accepted the album with unexpected reverence, handling it carefully as he opened to the indicated page. The black and white photographs showed young men in jungle fatigues, some smiling, others serious, all with the lean, alert look of soldiers in a combat zone. He tried to identify which one might be a younger Arnold. "Second row, third from the left," Arnold said, as if reading his mind. "That was me at 22. Kevin studied the image, a young man with a direct gaze and determined set to his jaw, bearing almost no resemblance to the elderly gentleman in the seat ahead, yet somehow conveying the same essential dignity. "You all look so young," Kevin remarked quietly. "We were," Arnold confirmed. "Most of us were just kids, really, younger than you are now." Kevin continued turning pages, each filled with moments frozen in time, soldiers relaxing during rare downtime, manning positions, standing beside helicopters and armored vehicles. Interspersed were more recent photos, middle-aged men at reunions, arms around each other's shoulders, their youthful features now buried beneath decades of life, but still recognizable in a smile or the set of their eyes. How many didn't make it home?" Kevin asked, his voice hushed. "From my particular unit? 7 never came home," Arnold replied. 4 more died within 5 years of returning, suicide, drug overdoses. The war followed some of us back. The simple statement, delivered without drama or self-pity, hit Kevin with unexpected force. His own problems, a delayed flight, a missed dinner reservation, suddenly seemed embarrassingly trivial. As Kevin carefully returned the album, Stallone studied him with newfound interest. "What takes you to Denver?" he asked, his tone conversational, offering Kevin a chance to participate in their discussion as an equal rather than an object of scorn. "Business meeting," Kevin replied, grateful for the neutral topic. "I work for a tech company based in San Francisco. We're expanding our operations in Colorado." "Technology," Diana chimed in. "My grandson Benjamin is studying computer science at UC Berkeley. It all seems like magic to me. These phones that do everything, except make breakfast." "They're working on that too," Kevin found himself joking, earning a genuine laugh from Diana. The conversation shifted, flowing more naturally now. Kevin found himself engaged in an actual discussion rather than the performative interactions he was accustomed to in his professional life. There was something refreshingly authentic about this exchange. No posturing, no networking agenda, just human connection. When Michelle returned with the beverage cart for a second service, the dynamic had visibly changed. Kevin was now leaning forward between the seats, actively participating in the conversation rather than hiding in shame. "Another round of drinks?" Michelle offered. "I think we're fine," Stallone responded, glancing at the others who nodded in agreement. As Michelle moved on, Stallone returned to a thread of conversation they had been pursuing. "So, you were saying about your grandfather serving in Korea, Kevin?" "Yes, though he rarely talked about it," Kevin replied. "It wasn't until his funeral that I learned he'd received a Bronze Star. My father found the medal in a drawer with some old photographs. Many of that generation kept their experiences to themselves," Arnold noted. "Different times, different ways of handling trauma." "Did you talk about your experiences when you came back?" Kevin asked. Arnold shook his head. "Not for many years. It wasn't until the late 80s that I joined a veterans group and started opening up. By then, I'd been carrying it alone for almost 2 decades. He paused, then added, "That's one of the reasons I volunteer with the VA hospital now, helping newer veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan find their voices sooner rather than later." "You volunteer?" Kevin asked, genuine curiosity in his tone. 3 days a week, Arnold confirmed, mostly driving veterans to appointments, some mentoring work with the younger ones, struggling with PTSD. Nothing heroic, just being useful. "I'd call that heroic," Stallone interjected. "The quiet work that happens after the cameras are gone and the parades are over, that's where real difference gets made." Diana nodded emphatically. My Frank did similar work before his passing. Said it gave him purpose. Kevin absorbed this, feeling increasingly small in the face of such humble service. I've never really volunteered for anything, he admitted. Always told myself I was too busy, that my work was contribution enough. Instead of the judgment he half expected, Arnold simply nodded. We all find our path in different ways and at different times. It's never too late to start. The plane began its initial descent into Denver, the captain's voice announcing their approach and the local weather conditions. As they dipped below the cloud layer, the Rocky Mountains came into view, majestic peaks still capped with snow. Even in the warming spring temperatures, beautiful country, Arnold commented, looking out his window. I did some of my rehabilitation hiking in those mountains after I came home. The quiet helped. As the aircraft continued its descent, Kevin found himself reflecting on the unexpected turn this flight had taken. What had begun as a routine business trip, marked by his own arrogance and impatience, had somehow transformed into something more significant, a lesson in humanity he hadn't known he needed. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical rumble, and the plane aligned with the runway. In these final moments before touchdown, Kevin made a decision. Mr. Schmidt, he said, leaning forward again, would you allow me to assist you when we deplane? And perhaps call you a car service to your destination? It's the least I can do. Arnold turned slightly, studying Kevin's face as if searching for something beyond the words. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him. Thank you, that would be appreciated. I'm staying with my daughter Lisa in Cherry Creek. The aircraft touched down smoothly, the thrust reversers roaring as they slowed along the runway. As they taxied toward the terminal, Stallone reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it back to Kevin. My production company is involved with a Veterans Support Initiative, he explained. If you're serious about wanting to contribute in some way, call this number. Ask for Michael Hall. Tell him I suggested you reach out. Kevin accepted the card with surprise. Thank you. I will. Actions, not words, Stallone said simply. That's all that matters in the end. When the seatbelt sign finally dinged off and passengers began the usual scramble for overhead bins, Kevin remained seated, waiting for the crowd to thin. Diana gathered her belongings and bid them all farewell, moving toward the exit with surprising agility for her age. Kevin noticed that Stallone made no move to use his celebrity status to deplane first. Instead, waiting patiently as Arnold prepared to transfer back to his wheelchair, which would be brought to the aircraft door. When the aisle finally cleared, Kevin stood and retrieved both his own bag and Arnold's small carry-on from the overhead compartment. Stallone assisted Arnold to his feet, supporting him with the same dignity and respect he had shown throughout the flight. Together, the three men made their way slowly toward the exit, where Chelsea waited with Arnold's wheelchair. The flight attendant's expression registered mild surprise at seeing Kevin assisting with Arnold's bag, a noticeable change from the entitled passenger who had boarded in Los Angeles. As Arnold settled into his wheelchair, Stallone shook his hand warmly. It was an honor meeting you, sir. Thank you for your service, both in Vietnam and at the VA hospital. The honor was mine, Arnold replied sincerely. Not every day you meet someone whose films brought my grandchildren so much joy. Stallone smiled at that, then turned to Kevin, extending his hand. Remember what I said? Actions speak louder than words. I hope you'll make that call. Kevin shook his hand firmly. I will. Thank you for everything today. With a final nod, Stallone departed, moving quickly through the terminal. Before most passengers could recognize him and cause a commotion, Kevin positioned himself behind Arnold's wheelchair. Ready when you are, sir. As they navigated through the busy terminal, Kevin pushing the wheelchair with careful attention to Arnold's comfort, neither man spoke for several minutes. Finally, as they approached the baggage claim area, Arnold broke. The silence. You know, he said thoughtfully, In my experience, it's not our worst moments that define us, but how we respond to them afterward. Kevin considered this as they continued through the airport. I've spent a lot of years defining myself by all the wrong things, he admitted. Status, money, appearances. And now? Arnold asked. Kevin glanced down at the business card in his pocket. His unexpected connection to something more meaningful than a Denver restaurant reservation. Now, he said quietly, I think I might be ready for a different definition. The Denver afternoon sun cast long shadows across the airport terminal as Kevin maneuvered Arnold's wheelchair toward the exit. They had collected Arnold's checked bag, a modest, well-worn suitcase that had clearly accompanied its owner on countless journeys. Kevin had insisted on handling it, along with his own sleek designer luggage that now seemed ostentatious by comparison. My daughter should be waiting outside, Arnold mentioned as they approached the sliding glass doors leading to the passenger pickup area. She drives a blue Honda Civic. Kevin nodded, scanning the line of vehicles idling along the curb. I'll still arrange that car service for you, he offered. It would give me peace of mind. Arnold shook his head with a gentle smile. That's kind, but unnecessary. Lisa is perfectly capable of getting her old father home safely. She's been doing it for years. As they emerged into the crisp Colorado air, a blue Honda pulled up almost immediately. A woman in her early 40s stepped out, waving when she spotted them. Lisa Patterson had her father's kind eyes and dignified bearing, dressed in practical jeans and a light jacket against the spring mountain chill. Dad, she called, approaching quickly. Her warm smile faltered slightly when she noticed Kevin pushing the wheelchair, a questioning look crossing her features. Lisa, Arnold greeted her warmly. This is Kevin Smith. We met on the flight from Los Angeles. Kevin extended his hand, somewhat awkwardly, acutely aware that he was being assessed. It's a pleasure to meet you. Lisa shook his hand with a firm grip, her eyes still curious. Thank you for helping my father. It was the least I could do, Kevin replied, the weight of his earlier behavior still heavy on his conscience. As Lisa helped transfer Arnold from the wheelchair to the passenger seat of her car, Kevin loaded the luggage into the trunk. There was a strange finality to the moment, this brief, transformative encounter drawing to its natural close. Arnold turned in his seat before Lisa closed the door. Kevin, may I offer you some advice? Of course, Kevin responded, standing a little straighter. That card Mr. Stallone gave you, don't put it in a drawer and forget about it. Arnold's eyes held Kevin's with unexpected intensity. Opportunities for genuine change don't come along every day. Kevin nodded solemnly. I won't forget, I promise. Good man, Arnold said simply, the two words carrying more weight than any elaborate speech could have. Lisa closed the passenger door and turned to Kevin. Thank you again, she said, though her tone suggested she sensed there was more to the story than she knew. As the blue Honda pulled away, Kevin stood alone on the curb, the business card from Stallone heavy in his pocket like a talisman. The encounter that had begun with his worst self on display had somehow ended with a glimpse of the person he could be, if he chose to be. 3 weeks later, the Denver Veterans Affairs Medical Center bustled with its usual Monday morning activity. Volunteers in blue vests guided veterans to appointments. Staff hurried between departments, and in the volunteer services office, Kevin Smith sat nervously filling out paperwork. Gone were the designer logos and carefully cultivated image of success. Instead, he wore simple khakis and a button-down shirt, his expression earnest as he completed the volunteer application forms. Mr. Smith? Michelle Hendricks, the volunteer coordinator, called from her office doorway. We're ready for your orientation. Now, Kevin gathered his completed forms and followed her into a small conference room where 3 other new volunteers waited. Michelle began distributing volunteer handbooks and ID badges. As I mentioned during your interview, we're particularly excited about your transportation program proposal, Michelle said to Kevin. Using your tech background to create a better scheduling system for volunteer drivers could really improve our efficiency. Kevin nodded, still somewhat uncomfortable with praise after the humbling experiences of recent weeks. It's just applying skills I already have to something that matters. The door to the conference room opened and a familiar figure in a wheelchair rolled in. Everyone, this is Arnold Schmidt, one of our most dedicated volunteers, Michelle introduced. He'll be helping with your orientation today. Arnold's eyes met Kevin's, his expression warming with recognition and something else. Approval. No words were needed to acknowledge how far Kevin had come from that moment of thoughtless cruelty in the LAX terminal. Welcome to the team, Arnold said simply, addressing the group but looking directly at Kevin. You're all about to discover that while you came here thinking you'd be helping others, you'll likely receive far more than you give. After the orientation session, Kevin lingered behind as the other new volunteers departed. I didn't know you'd be here today, he said to Arnold. I wanted to surprise you once I completed the training. Arnold chuckled softly. Lisa mentioned you'd called the house. I had a feeling you might follow through. He gestured toward the window overlooking the hospital grounds. Did you also follow up with Stallone's contact? Kevin nodded. Michael Hall is coordinating a fundraising event next month, a charity screening of a new documentary about veterans transitioning to civilian life. He's letting me help with the technical aspects and corporate outreach. Good, Arnold said approvingly. Small steps consistently taken. As they moved through the hospital corridors together, Kevin pushing Arnold's wheelchair by the older man's request rather than necessity, Arnold shared stories about the various veterans they passed. A young woman recently returned from Afghanistan who was starting a small business, an elderly Korean War veteran who visited weekly to play chess with younger vets, a middle-aged man who had found healing through art therapy after 3 combat tours. Everyone has a story, Arnold observed. Most people never take the time to listen. Kevin had spent the past weeks doing little but listening. To Michael Hall's experiences in Desert Storm, to the veterans at the support group meetings he'd begun attending, and to his own conscience, which had grown increasingly difficult to ignore. His tech company had been surprisingly supportive of his request for a modified schedule that allowed him to spend Mondays volunteering. His colleagues had reacted with varying degrees of surprise when he'd explained his new commitment, particularly Ryan Jenkins, who had been his frequent companion in dismissive behavior toward others they deemed unimportant. "You've changed," Ryan had commented recently over lunch, his tone suggesting he wasn't entirely comfortable with the transformation in his friend. "I'm trying to," Kevin had responded simply. Now, as he walked alongside Arnold through the VA hospital, Kevin felt a sense of peace that had been absent throughout his career of aggressive ambition and status-seeking. The journey that had begun with a moment of cruelty had led him somewhere unexpected, not to public shame and cancellation as he'd initially feared, but towards something that felt remarkably like redemption. "There's someone I'd like you to meet," Arnold said, interrupting Kevin's reflections as they approached the physical therapy department. Justin Jones, young Marine who lost his leg in Fallujah, brilliant with computers but struggling to find direction, might benefit from mentoring from someone in the tech industry. Kevin nodded, understanding the implied request. "I'd be honored to meet him." Inside the physical therapy room, a young man in his late 20s was working intensely with a therapist, practicing walking with a prosthetic leg. His face glistened with sweat from the effort, but his jaw was set with determination. "Justin," Arnold called. "Got someone here you might want to meet." Justin Jones looked up, his focus momentarily broken. then carefully lowered himself to sit on the nearby bench. The therapist nodded, indicating they could take a break. "Justin, this is Kevin Smith," Arnold introduced. "He works in software development and just joined our volunteer program." Kevin extended his hand, struck by the strength in Justin's grip. Despite his obvious exhaustion from the therapy session, Arnold mentioned, "You're interested in tech," Kevin said. Justin nodded. "Was studying computer science before my deployment, trying to figure out how to get back into it." "My company has an internship program," Kevin offered. "Some positions are specifically reserved for veterans. I'd be happy to tell you more about it when you're finished here." Interest flickered in Justin's eyes. "That would be... yeah, I'd like that." As Justin returned to his therapy session, Kevin and Arnold continued their tour of the facility. They passed the mental health department where group therapy sessions were in progress, the occupational therapy workshops where veterans learned new skills, and finally ended at the hospital's small coffee shop. "Coffee's on me," Kevin insisted as they found a table near the window. While waiting for their order, Kevin noticed Arnold watching him with a thoughtful expression. "What?" Kevin asked. "Just thinking about how much can change in a short time," Arnold replied. "A month ago, we were strangers on an airplane. A month ago, I was someone I'm not particularly proud to have been," Kevin admitted. Their coffee arrived, delivered by a volunteer who greeted Arnold by name before continuing her rounds. "You know," Arnold said after taking a sip, "I've been thinking about that moment at the airport when you pushed my wheelchair aside." Kevin winced visibly. "I wish I could erase that moment." "I don't," Arnold said surprisingly. "Not anymore. If it hadn't happened, if Stallone hadn't intervened, if we hadn't ended up seated near each other on that flight, where would you be right now?" The question hung in the air between them. Kevin considered it seriously, imagining the alternate path, returning from his Denver business trip unchanged, continuing his life of shallow pursuits and casual disregard for others. "Probably at my desk, working on quarterly projections, complaining about something trivial," he finally answered. "Definitely not here." Arnold nodded, satisfied with the response. Sometimes our worst moments become our most important turning in points, if we let them. "I keep thinking about something Stallone said on the plane," Kevin reflected. "Actions, not words." "Wise man," Arnold commented with a small smile. "Though I still prefer the original Rocky to the sequels." Kevin laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that would have been foreign to him a month ago. As their conversation continued, his phone buzzed with an incoming call from Michael Hall. Kevin glanced at the screen apologetically. "I should take this. It's about the fundraiser." Arnold gestured for him to go ahead. "By all means." Kevin stepped away to take the call, leaving Arnold watching the activity in the hospital lobby. When he returned a few minutes later, his expression was animated with excitement. "That was Michael. Stallone has confirmed he'll attend the fundraiser in person. They're expecting to raise over $100,000 for the Veterans Housing Initiative." "That's excellent news," Arnold said. "There's more," Kevin continued, his voice catching slightly with emotion. "They want us both to speak at the event, about how we met and what happened afterward. They think it might inspire others." Arnold's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Both of us?" Kevin nodded. "They're calling it Unexpected Journeys, from confrontation to connection. What do you think? Would you be willing to tell our story?" Arnold considered the request, taking another thoughtful sip of his coffee. "On one condition," he finally responded. "Name it," Kevin said. "We tell the whole truth, including the part where you behaved terribly," Arnold said, though his eyes twinkled with gentle humor. "No sanitizing the story to make yourself look better." Kevin didn't hesitate. "Complete honesty, I promise." As they finished their coffee and prepared to part ways, Kevin to his modified work schedule, Arnold to his regular volunteer duties in the hospital's welcome center, Kevin found himself reflecting on the strange serendipity that had brought them together. "You know," he said, as they reached the hospital entrance, "my grandfather used to say that character isn't built in moments of convenience, but in moments of choice, when the right path isn't the easy one." Arnold nodded approvingly. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man." "I never really understood what he meant until recently," Kevin admitted. "Now I think about it every day." As they said their goodbyes, Arnold extended his hand. Kevin shook it firmly, no longer the entitled young executive pushing aside an elderly veteran, but a man finding his way toward becoming the person he should have been all along. Outside, the Colorado sunshine illuminated the mountains in the distance, peaks that had witnessed countless human stories unfold beneath them, including this small but significant tale of transformation that had begun with a moment of cruelty and ended with an unlikely friendship. Some journeys cover thousands of miles, while others traverse the more challenging distance from who we are to who we might become. For Kevin Smith, the most important voyage of his life had begun with a simple choice: to look back at the man he had wronged and find the courage to become better. As he walked to his car, Stallone's business card was no longer in his pocket, its purpose fulfilled, its message delivered. In its place was something far more valuable: the understanding that redemption isn't found in grand gestures or public acclaim, but in the quiet, consistent choice to be better today than yesterday. And in that understanding was the greatest lesson of all, that it's never too late to change direction, to rewrite your own story, or to become the hero of a journey you never expected to take.